when we talk about sin, it's like, man, when we break that right relationship between us and God, or us and others, or us ourselves, like that's what sin is. When it's no longer what God intended it to be or designed it to be, that hurts the heart of God, and that is sin. And so when you're looking at pornography, you may not think you're hurting anybody. You are. You're hurting who God designed you to be. You are his holy temple, and that breaks his heart. And that's why we call that sin.
My name is Caroline, and I'm a counselor.
My name is Brett, and I'm a pastor.
And together, we're tackling difficult topics from a biblical perspective.
Welcome to There We Said It.
All right, here we are once again.
Hey.
Thanks for showing up again today.
Thank you. Yeah, it's always a challenge sometimes to get up and figure out what am I going to wear, because I always have to think about our, of course, YouTube audience that joins us and watches us. And if you're listening on audio only, or that's kind of been your preferred way to get the There We Said It podcast, we do this on YouTube as well. So if you ever want to see our outfits and mannerisms, it's a wonderful way to get to see the stress we go through to making sure that we look somewhat professional and functional each and every single podcast for you, the listener. So,
but only on one side. I only have to look good on the right. You only have to look good on the left.
That's why I always have the hard cut on my hair right here. So if I sat on this side, my barber's thing would be like wasted.
We both do it on our part side.
Yeah, crazy, huh?
I think one of these days we're going to confuse everyone and we're just going to flip sides.
Well, I'm for it. Let's do it.
It'll probably throw us off more than anybody else.
Let's just keep it as it is.
Okay, so last week you boys vetoed me and I didn't get to ask a question. Yeah, that's not happening this week. I'm asking questions. But listeners, you didn't send in any questions.
Yeah, that was a little disappointing.
I did get some texts of like, people were going to send them in, but they laughed and like, you probably don't want to answer that. Those were my friends.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, another invitation. If you have questions, things you would like to get to know us through, or that you think would be funny for us to address, send them in. We have a couple different ways to do that. We'll hit them at the end, but go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Today's question, because I want people, there's so many differences in us, and yet we can come together and like have these great conversations. So I knew this would be a good one. Would you rather cook or order in? I think the funny thing is people are going to think that our answers are going to be opposite than what they are.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah. I would rather cook.
You're crazy.
Yeah, I would rather cook. So a little known fact about me is that when I was in high school, I had a chance to go to vocational school, and one of the things that they allowed you to choose was culinary arts. And so I actually went through 2 years of culinary arts training and was qualified as a sous chef.
Wow.
And so
do you have like a certificate?
Somewhere back in Michigan, there might be one. But I could go as fancy as you want and or as simple as mac and cheese. But I do like cooking. I love plating. I like the presentation, and I like the combination of taste all across the plate to make sure that it is just this wonderful experience for your mouth. So that's kind of my claim to fame.
Okay, I'll be waiting for my dinner invite.
Okay.
So wait, like plating, like you like to make it pretty?
Yeah,
and like,
all of it.
Get like?
Yeah, I wipe the drips off and all of it. It's a presentation thing, because that's part of the taste. As you see, so you taste, and so that's an important thing. Yeah.
Interesting. I'd rather order in.
Why is that?
So many reasons. I think there was a season where I cooked. I like homeschooled my kids for 10 years. And I mean, I had to make 3 meals a day for all these kids. There were only 2 at the time, but that was a lot.
Yeah.
And so I think just as my kids went back into school, and then I went back to work and just did more, and then I went back to school. It's not my season.
Sure.
Do I like it? I do. If I like had all 1 million ingredients and 1 million hours and nobody around, I would do it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, DoorDash is my favorite thing.
Fair enough. Got to support those local restaurants, which is always a good thing.
Yeah. Well, my husband does work for the food service industry, so I always say it's job security. So really, that's good. I'm just helping us out.
Okay, so we got a big topic today.
We have a very big topic today. So we're going to start with a disclaimer for this topic. This is possibly not a kid-friendly topic. So if you do tend to listen with your kids around, I would recommend that you listen on your own first and then decide if you're comfortable with your kids listening. I also want to give a disclaimer to spouses. I'm going to throw it out there. So our topic today is pornography. And this is when spouses who maybe have a spouse that is addicted to pornography, where they want to tune out, right? Because, I've heard it all before. And I am one of those spouses. And yes, we've heard it all before. Don't feel left out. Like, listen to this week's podcast. And next week, we are going to do an entire podcast for the spouse of the addict and the betrayal trauma and what you need to know about what you've been through so you don't feel alone and you can find healing. So I just want to give that double disclaimer before we start.
That's really good. Yeah. So make sure you tune in next week as we talk about that. We think this is going to be kind of the 1-2 punch that kind of covers a lot of ground. And again, we do this so that people can find healing and hope.
Yep.
And so we really are excited for you to hear this content from us today. So we actually have a special guest in the studio with us today. His name is Phil Krygsheld. He's the executive pastor at Calvary Reformed Church, where I also pastor. He is also one of my best friends. And I'm super excited to have him in the studio today. And so, Pastor Phil, help us to know a little bit more about you.
Oh, thank you guys for having me on, Brett and Caroline. I would also definitely order in. My wife and I like pad thai, so
there you go.
You're not going to see me cooking in the kitchen, although I have appreciated a lot of your prepared meals before. You do a great job.
Thanks, bro.
I'm thankful to be on this podcast with you guys. Thank you for having me here.
For sure. Thanks for coming.
So our topic today is the topic of pornography. And as we get into this, I just wanted to share some stats that I pulled, which is a combination from some Barna Research and a few other organizations that specialize in this topic. And these, I've read these like probably 5 times. And every time I read them, I think that my eyes are seeing the wrong numbers and I'm having some dyslexia or something.
Yeah.
And then I reread it, I'm like, no, man, it just says what it says. And the statistics are shocking. I want to share just a few with you today. It says that there's around 42 million porn websites, which totals 370 million pages of porn that are on the internet today.
Jeez.
47% of families in the United States reported that pornography is a problem in their home. That's 1 out of 2 homes. 11 is the average age that a child is first exposed to pornography. And 94% of children will see porn by the age of 14. That one hits hard.
Yeah. Yep.
56% of American divorces involve one party having an obsessive interest in pornographic website. 70% of Christian youth pastors reported that they have had at least one teen come to them for help in dealing with pornography in the past 12 months. This is one that I think sometimes gets overlooked. 33% of women aged 25 and under search for porn at least once a month. And 13% of self-identified Christian women say they've never watched porn, while 87% of Christian women have watched porn.
Okay.
So 87% of Christian women have watched porn, while only 13 were willing to say, yes, it's me.
Yeah.
57% of pastors say porn addiction is the most damaging issue in their congregation, and 69 say porn has adversely impacted their church. And we know that pastors are absolutely, giving into this as well.
Yep.
And here's the one that really hit me. The porn industry annual revenue is more than the NFL, NBA, and MLB combined. It is also more than the combined revenues of ABC, CBS, and NBC.
That's insane.
This is a massive money maker.
Right.
And it is an absolute pit of darkness. So we're going to talk about this very important topic today. And one of the reasons why we wanted to have Phil on is because Phil has a story, like so many of us, that directly connects to this. He's going to be teaching about this on Sunday at Calvary. And so, Phil, if you would just be so bold to just share a little bit of your story with us, give us kind of the flyover, and tell us a little bit how this particular topic has affected your life.
Sure. Thank you guys again for having me. This is so good for me because part of my story is that I'm a people pleaser, and that came from a very young age, from a traumatic event that I witnessed, seeing my mother being beat up by my dad. And I can still remember being 5 years old, and he turned around and said, "You're next," because I had just kind of come in from playing outside, and we had one of those old screen doors, and it snapped shut. And so he was caught hitting my mother up against the refrigerator, and then he looked at me and said, "You're next." And I just ran and I hid under my bed. And I never really knew what happened until I was part of a 12-step study through Celebrate Recovery. And I finally called my mom and said, hey, what actually happened the rest of that day? And she just gave this beautiful story of the Lord being able to give her enough strength to push my dad off of her. As soon as he had said that, something just ignited inside of my mom. It's like, no, that's not happening. And she was able to push him out that back door, shut that door, quick run to the front door, shut that door. And then she said, and then I came up to find you under your bed hiding. And it took me a long time to get you out. And I never really understood how much that story impacted me. Because that is where I learned how to hide in my life. Nobody was ever going to see me make mistakes, because that identified me immediately to my real dad, and I just could not be like him. So I learned how to put on a good smile. I learned how to help everybody else around me, even growing up and being a teenager, college, you name it. Everybody wanted their kids to be in my Sunday school class, to be in my classroom. Oh, Mr. K is such a great guy at church. I was always the person that people came to for their problems. And that's kind of how we grew up. You and I have a different story, Brett. You got saved and ambushed by God's love when you were 21. I grew up in the church, and that's just what you learn. You sacrifice, you help other people. And that's wonderful and that's good, but I never knew how to take care of myself. And so on and off, struggled with lust, struggled with, all of that changed. It used to be really hard to find pornographic images. You had to find a VHS. That's how old I am. And that all rapidly changed. You could have a great 23 hours and 50 minutes of your day, and in 10 minutes, you could just find the most depraved things. And so my story of addiction just kind of started coming. I'd have seasons of sobriety, but I learned how to hide it really well. And I was a family pastor at a church after being a public school teacher for 10 years. And my wife had this great job. She worked at an emergency animal clinic from 6 p.m. till 2 in the morning. And so I was a great dad, played all those things, did all the right things. But as soon as they went to bed, boom, my addiction hit hardcore. I would think about it every day. Man, I get the kids to bed. We play great games, tackle football downstairs. Tackle basketball is actually what we called it. But then my addiction took over, and it absolutely affected my brain. And I just thought I needed to be a better Christian. I had the bracelets. I had the scripture verses on my computer. I had the accountability groups. Just be a better Christian, pray more, get your spiritual disciplines in order. Why can't I be the husband and the man I want to be? And then that one night when my wife didn't work till 2 a.m. in the morning, and she came home early, and she saw me at the worst moment in my life. And all this stuff that I was running away from, I didn't want to turn out like my real dad, who I was the third kid when they got divorced. We had just had 3 kids, celebrated my youngest son's birthday, and here I am in that spot. My wife walks in, sees me in the throes of my addiction. I'm like, here it is. Everything I was trying to run from my entire life is happening to me now. I'm going to lose it all. And I'm a family pastor at a church. That was the irony of it all. My wife has a story to tell, and I'm so thankful that you're going to be talking about betrayal trauma next week with Brett, Caroline, because that's so important. We were just talking about that last night. She knew I was doing the podcast today, and we still talk about how in my mind, when she leaves the house, there's still pathways in my brain that all right, now's your time. Go take care of your addiction. And for her, it's the same thing. Whenever she leaves the house, she's like, man, I wonder what my husband's doing. Is he lying to me today? Can I trust him today? Is he really doing what he's saying he's doing? And that is real stuff that affects her every day.
The trauma response.
Oh my goodness. It is real. And so we still have to talk about that today and stay vulnerable. But anyhow, my story, I got caught, went to counseling where I was just convinced I just needed to be a better Christian. And that's where the clinical aspect of this hit. My counselor, Matt, said, hey, Phil, we're going to talk about that. Absolutely, we'll talk about your spirituality and your faith. But we need to talk about you and your life and what happened to you. And that's where he kind of unpacked this traumatic event in my life. And I can still remember that watershed moment in my life, even very specific to the kind of pornography I was watching. He's like, you understand the connection there. You are taking care of everybody else around you, and you never knew how to take care of yourself. And so that's what your flesh craved for. And so just helping me get to the root of that, the why of that, and then combining that with my faith story. Man, that's the story's much longer than that, but that's a little bit of a
and that's so important,
recap.
Right? Getting to the root, because oftentimes people just work on the behavior modification. We'll just stop doing it,
right?
And then pray more. Not saying that praying more is bad.
No, not at all.
Right? But
don't hear your pastor saying that.
But if you don't get to the root, it's just going to keep growing back. And so behavior modification is just kind of trimming the top off, right? And it looks great and it lasts for a little while, but until you get to the root and you do the heart change, it's just going to keep coming back up.
So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that from, the why, not just the what, right? Because we often focus on the what. A lot of that story goes back to the why. What are some of the reasons why people really get deeply entrenched into pornography in the practice that you have, Caroline? Like, what are you hearing? What has been kind of your consensus?
It always comes from a trauma. I brought a book. You made me think of this book. It's TINSA. It's Trauma-Induced Sexual Addiction, a neurological approach to the treatment of sex addiction. Great book. We will link it. But a lot of it does come from childhood trauma. Childhood trauma and just needing to hide from something, either an abusive father or a dad who you felt maybe you could never please. And so you're always trying to look the perfect part, yet you need some kind of a release of some sort.
Okay. So abuse is one.
Yeah.
What other kind of things are there?
It's like any drug. I mean, really, it is like a drug. It's a dopamine hit. Dope is a drug.
Yep.
So when you look at pornography, you get that dopamine hit. So I'm going to read the paragraph. It's very small. Research has shown that pornography use is correlated with physical changes in your brain. The visual stimulus of pornography hijacks the brain's reward system, which is that dopamine hit, and overwhelms it with unnatural, prolonged dopamine levels. So it is just like any drug, right? A drug addict is going to start off with something small, like, I'm just going to smoke a little bit of weed. But after a while, that's not enough for your brain anymore. It needs more, and then it needs more, and then it needs more, and then you end up possibly a meth addict because it's just your brain needed more. And so with pornography, it's the same thing, right? You see it once, you get that little dopamine hit, that little reward system in your brain is like, oh, hey, that kind of felt good.
Right.
And the next time you have a down moment, your brain's like, hey, remember when you did that and it felt good?
Yeah.
You should go do that again.
Okay. So, it's this pull towards pornography can come from abuse and trauma, can come from chemical deficits, dopamine, other things. And then there's just, I think, kind of, and maybe this is just, it sounds basic, but there's the draw of sin.
Yeah.
Sin is enticing. Every time Satan tempts us, it's a very enticing, winsome word. Hey, just try this. It's better than cheating on your spouse, right? I mean, physically sleeping with, having an adulterous affair, that would be terrible. This is just a little way to be naughty, but not be bad. And, the thing about Satan is he always makes sin sound so appealing, and then he comes around the other side that once you give into it, he completely crushes you. What a terrible Christian you are.
Right.
What a terrible woman or man you are.
You have that shame spiral.
You are the worst. Now you have to hide.
Yeah.
And once you start hiding, it's so easier to stay hidden and stay in that addiction because I've already screwed up. So it's like, well, I'll just keep doing it again because, I've already went down this road. Nobody knows. I already feel terrible. And so that spiral continues to go down. And it's interesting how sin is always so winsome and it always ends up killing something that God could actually create within us that would be beautiful, which would be a holy understanding of intimacy, a holy understanding of what marriage is or his design for covenant and how sex is to be carried out within that covenant. So it always is, I think that's the voice of Satan always saying it's going to be good, and then he comes around and he just crushes you on the other side.
Yeah. And so let me to speak into that a little bit as a wife who, and my husband said I could talk about this, so he's not going to be mad. As a wife of a husband who's been addicted to pornography, the issue is, and this is so the enemy. It wasn't necessarily the pornography, it was the lying. It's the lying that hurts more. So anybody who's out there who is hiding this from their spouse because they think the fact that I look at pornography is going to make my husband or my wife leave me, I'm here to tell you right now, it's the lying. Like, yes, the pornography hurts, but we can work through that. and all that I've learned about the brain and again, I've done this work for years on myself to know, like, this isn't because of anything I did that my husband went this way. But it's the lying. And that's what the enemy wants. Like, go hide, just lie. And as a wife, it's always like, no, just come out into the light and tell me the truth, and let's work through this together.
That is absolutely correct, Caroline. Like, it is the lying that does it. And then on the other side of that, it's like, yeah, but if I tell somebody the truth, I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to be abandoned. I'm going to be all alone. And so it's like this battle of my sin, my addiction is negatively affecting me because of the things that have happened to me, but it's also hitting all the gremlins from my wife where she feels like I'm not good enough. And okay, if only I did this more, then my husband wouldn't struggle. And that is not it at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. It's the lying that hurts. And there's stuff beyond that as well. But I couldn't agree with you more. You hit a very
central point. And I'm sure you got to experience that moment of coming out of the darkness and into the light.
Yeah.
And there was a lot there were consequences there, but the burden off your shoulders and being free in the light was
freedom for me is like, man, I don't have to hide anymore. What a huge burden is lifted.
Right.
And at the same time, simultaneously, what's happening to my wife is her whole world is crumbling. This man that she thought she knew is destroyed. And so while I'm feeling this burden being lifted and this freedom of, man, I don't have to hide anymore. Thank you so much. Her world is falling.
Right,
apart.
because the burden that you just got lifted just got put right on top of her.
Exactly.
And so that's what I always tell spouses, be patient.
Yeah.
Be patient, because you've been working and dealing with this issue for years. And so you've worked through stuff in your own brain, and now you're in the freedom. She's just starting at square one.
Right, and the lying is so true, right? Because I told myself, I believe that, man, if anybody saw my cracks, if anybody saw my failures, it was over for me. Everybody's going to find out I'm a fraud, I'm delusional, and I'm going to lose everything. And as hurt and upset as my wife was, and the people and the friends that I told, guess what? Nobody left me.
Yeah.
Nobody rejected me. In fact, they pulled me in closer and said, you know what? Your sin is not who you are. And for so long in my life, you want to talk about it from a spiritual aspect, Brett, my spirituality, if somebody said, hey, how's your spiritual life? I would immediately connect that to my behavior. Was I a good boy today? Oh, I was a good boy today. So spiritually, I'm doing well.
Okay.
And that's not who I am. My identity is not in what I do. It's in whose I am in Jesus Christ. And that was something I also had to unpack in counseling and in therapy. And so, it's a big deal.
That's awesome.
So thank you for sharing that. And I love that we can have guests come in. You know, I mean, certainly pornography as a man has been part of my story. It hasn't been like the epicenter of my story as much as other things are. So that's why I appreciate it. And I'll tell you, that's when you and I became friends. I don't even know if you know this. I remember we worked together, Phil and I, at a church in Indiana, and so we were in the same staff together in different capacities. And I always kind of looked at you as like a dude who did kind of have it like together, and like, you know, you were just doing your thing. No, it's good, man. No, I mean, I say that in the best possible way. Like, you didn't put on like a haughty kind of spirit or anything. I just kind of looked at you like, you know, yeah, he's got his life pretty put together. And I remember sitting in our direct reports office together for a meeting, and you were sharing your story about this, and that was the first time that I really connected with you as a friend, because you were vulnerable. And I guess when I heard you share your story, I was like, okay, he's got his own things, I got my own things, and if the goal isn't who can be the best at hiding them, but who can be the best at kind of sharing these openly, but also not just like celebrating it and be like, well, you know, so let's go back and do it again, but actually like having a transformed walk and seeking accountability and sharing it for the sake of being in the light so that Satan loses that foothold. That really connected me to you and kind of made me realize like this is a guy that I can be vulnerable with, I can be friends with. And so I shared my story with you, and, you know, hopefully you felt the same. So, you know, I think as we think about this spiritually, it is important to understand that when you think about pornography, for the most part, while I'm sure there are some who are addicted to some form of audible pornography, it's mostly visual.
Yeah.
It's in print, in magazines, it's in videos. And so I don't have a statistic to say what amount of pornography of the stats that we said is video. Yeah. Probably a lot of it would be my educated guess. And if you think about that, it really goes back to what Jesus said in Matthew 6:22. He said, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? And I think it really talks to the importance of what we let into our eyes and how it directly affects. And I would say the ears are very important too. We can talk about that another time. The things we listen to, the people we listen to, deeply affect how we go about our spiritual walk and the thoughts that we think about ourselves and others. But this particular one, I think, is pertinent to this topic of pornography. And Jesus is saying, your eyes are going to feed your soul.
Yeah.
And that feeding is either going to be good and righteous, or it's going to be evil and broken. And as we think about pornography, it really is this desire to look at something and to long for something or to lust for something that begins here and then goes to our heart, and of course then ultimately out to our hands. And so as a pastor, one thing I really caution people towards is like, be careful what you watch.
Yeah.
You know, even shows today that are considered like PG-13, right?
It's everywhere.
I feel like PG-13 used to be like the early 90s R.
Yeah. Oh, I would agree with that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like what used to be like the R used to be like NC-17. Like you needed a parent's permission slip to go in and watch this. And
then you have MA, that's just straight up pornography.
Yeah, just straight up pornography. Like you're going to see a full sex scene. Like you're going to see all the parts, all the stuff. And you're watching this in an actual movie theater. And I've been in like movies where I thought this was pretty like, I don't know, like maybe it was like just a little off color, and then some scene pops up and my kids are in the room and you're covering their eyes and you're holding their ears and you're like having this big dissertation apology about why I'm so sorry that I chose to let you be in the living room. Like, I didn't know that was coming, son, and we got ambushed. I'm sorry.
You don't anymore though, because it is an ambush.
It is. And you know, this just happened recently with my son who's 12. He has a little iPad that he plays games on. We have a kid's YouTube account which has all these filters on content. We've looked at it, and I will say that works really well. What it didn't work against was some of this like spyware or whatever it is from just him clicking around different things on the internet. Even though it's guarded and protected, they upload these viruses into your device and it puts ads in front of these kids. And so he came into my room. He's like, hey, listen, I didn't click on this. I don't know what it is. And it was an ad of like some scantily dressed girl that's like, there are singles in your area. And it had like our zip code in there. And like no one has messed with anything like that.
Yeah.
You know, we look at that stuff, monitor it all the time. Yep. And he was like mortified, like he didn't know what to do. He felt like he did something wrong. I was like, buddy, listen, you didn't do anything wrong. Right. Okay. You have to recognize that there's an enemy who wants your eyes.
Yep.
And he wants you to look at this stuff because if he can get you to long for it, he'll get you to take a step. And if you take a step, he's going to condemn you and you're going to start to hide. And so I did have an opportunity to talk to him about the perils of sin, but it bugged me and it made me angry.
Well, you called it exactly what it is. A virus.
Yeah, it is.
Right? It's a virus. And so if you don't get rid of that virus, if you look at porn once or twice and then you realize it's wrong and you're done and you go the other way, you're going to be okay.
Right.
But if you let that virus sit in there and you don't treat it and you keep letting it fester, and it's going to just do massive damage.
Yeah. And I think it's part of that virus too of it's viewed as so much more permissible today. Where it really was a very naughty thing, I think, for a lot of my life. I'm 40, and I think there were plenty of years that looking back, I know my parents had a stash that I found when I was young, and it certainly was intrigued by as a young, impressionable 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old boy trying to figure out life. That was one thing, but it was viewed as very naughty, and they thought it was naughty. Certainly they weren't proud to talk about it in my presence at all. And I don't think that would ever be something they would have ever wanted to talk about with me afterwards. But today it's become almost like this permissible sin. that it's better than the alternative, which would be physical adultery, which can, obviously, have some implications too.
I want to hit on that because you talked about that earlier, in that the Bible says lusting after a woman is adultery.
Tantamount to it, yeah.
And so, as a woman who's been affected by this, that's adultery.
Yes,
like
exactly.
It feels the same as if you've had physical relations with another woman.
Yeah, and it's adultery to God. It's not just adultery because we feel the pain of it, and rightfully so. You feel the pain because it is sin, and it is adultery to God. So sorry if you hear a rumbling. There is something happening underneath us in the studio where I think there's some construction happening. So don't worry, we are fine. And Phil and I are actually sharing a mic. And if you're watching this online, you have to see how tense this is between us right now.
They're so close.
We are nuzzled up in
love
here
it.
trying to share a mic. So if you hear some weird sounds, it's just me turning the mic, and if it creaks and cracks is what it is. Yeah. But I think
I want to go though. Let's call it what it is though.
Yeah.
It's adultery.
It's adultery.
I'm just going to put
There we said it.
I'm going to label it. There I said it.
Right.
It is adultery. So men, women, whoever you are looking at porn, if you're looking at it and you're going, well, I'm not cheating on my wife, it's not adultery, I'm going to call you out. Yeah, you're cheating on your spouse, it's adultery.
Yep.
Get some help.
Yep. In the eyes of God, it is.
Yeah. And if I could just speak into that too, and you might hear this mic as we turn it, it swivels. We get a nice little sound effect for you as well. So enjoy that. And we say sin, and sometimes I think if you're listening to this podcast, you're like, well, what does that mean, sin? Man, when we talk about sin, it's like, man, when we break that right relationship between us and God, or us and others, or us ourselves, like that's what sin is. When it's no longer what God intended it to be or designed it to be, that hurts the heart of God, and that is sin. And so when you're looking at pornography, you may not think you're hurting anybody. You are. You're hurting who God designed you to be. You are his holy temple, and that breaks his heart. And that's why we call that sin. So
and if you're not a Christian and you don't have the Holy Spirit and you don't believe in sin or whatever, and so it's normalized in your world, pornography, because I know people who it's normalized. It's like, even when my husband and I went through stuff, they were like, what's the big deal? And they didn't really see it. Even if you think it's not a big deal and it's not hurting people, it is. First and foremost, I just read the thing on what it does to your brain. And the last line of that was, the result is that the brain physically deteriorates in shape, size, and chemical balance. So you are doing damage to it. You can't see. You might not be able to see it, but your brain is being damaged. And in any addiction you get into, whether it's pornography, drugs, alcohol, the age at which you get into that addiction, your brain stops developing, and your brain will not start developing again until you are out of that addiction. So if you get into a pornography addiction at 14 and you don't get out until you're 30, at 30, you still have the brain of a 14-year-old.
Yeah. Wow.
And that has, and I don't know anybody who wants to get stuck with the brain of a 14-year-old.
Yeah. Into your adult years of life.
Into your adult years. So, I mean, those are like heavy things that people just don't know or don't think about. But then you're going to carry that into your marriage, acting like a 14-year-old.
Well, right. And what pornography I found also does is that it gives you the wrong idea of what sex is.
Yeah.
So you have to remember that pornography is a production. It's a show. It's a movie. It's not real. It is real, but it's not real in the sense that this doesn't depict what intimacy is like. And I've talked to men who had deep porn addictions for either seasons or were in them, and they were struggling with intimacy with their wife. Yeah. And one of the reasons is that they were expecting their wife to be this uber sexual, like do all the things that they saw in the video. Yeah. And their idea is like, well, she's just kind of boring in bed because, she doesn't do all the things. And I'm like, why do you think those things are real? Right. It's like, talking to a guy the other day about, when you see gun shootouts in movies. I was talking to a cop and he's like, man, those movies are so fake. Every gun has 10,000 bullets. Yeah. No one has to reload, and you hit the target every time you shoot at it. Right. As a guy who goes out and shoots, it's hard to shoot. Like, it's very hard. It's not realistic, but people have this idea. And so when you watch these pornography videos, you're getting a false idea of what sex and intimacy is like. And the other thing is you get a very twisted view about what power looks like in that exchange.
Right.
Where it's supposed to be this mutual submission of caring for one another.
Right.
You often see abuse.
How God designed it, yeah. Not as abuse.
Crazy.
Yeah. So another thing with because a lot of these, I don't know why I keep saying men, and I know it's women too. So please know that I know women look at pornography just like men. But a lot of times there isn't that physical intimacy. And that's because you have to have emotional intimacy before you can have great physical intimacy.
That's right.
And if you're looking at pornography and if you're hiding it from your spouse, you're not going to have emotional intimacy. And so therefore, you can never have fireworks or anything good when you go for that physical intimacy.
So talk about that. If someone's deep in a porn addiction, your experience has been that the connection to actual intimacy with their spouse is deeply severed.
Oh, 100%. Because they're hiding. So they can't be honest. So they're not their authentic self. They can't connect emotionally. Because a lot of times when people are addicts, they don't even know how to get in connection with their emotions themselves on the inside. Because they're hiding it. They're stuffing it. The shame and the guilt and the nope, I've got to be good. I've got to be perfect. No one's going to hurt me. That just pushes it all down.
Yeah, and when you're in the throes of addiction, that's what you think. You think you're alone.
Yeah.
You think you're isolated and that nobody's going through what you're going through. And that's how the enemy attacks you even more. And so when you find that human connection, that intimacy, that's actually what helps you start finding hope in healing, that I can bring my whole self into my relationship with God and into my relationship with others, not just the good parts, but the darkness too. And that's where you really find peace. Like I don't have to hide anymore behind my smile. I don't have to hide anymore behind what I do. Like I can bring all of me into this relationship, and that's peace and that's intimacy. And that's where that cycle of addiction starts to break down, is when you start finding connection with other people. So
do me a favor really quick, Phil, because you just said that, like you feel alone when you're in it. So for all of our listeners who are listening, who are feeling that aloneness right now, can you just talk to them for a second and just, for one, let them know they're not alone, because you've been there.
You're not alone. All the voices in your head that tell you everything you have is going to be lost is not true. There's going to be hurt. There's going to be consequences, but there is a way through it, and the only way through it is to go through it. Reach out. Find somebody that loves you, somebody that you trust. Come talk to us, any one of us three. If you're a man or a woman, you are not alone. There is absolutely hope and healing, and you can find intimacy, and you can start going on this road of recovery. So absolutely.
Yeah. And as the wife of that, for the spouse who's afraid that their spouse is going to leave, that's a lie too. They might. I mean, I can't speak for every woman, but I can say that there can be healing, beautiful healing in your marriage when you're open and honest and you stop lying.
Yeah, let me speak to one last thing here. We're starting to run out of time, but I think there's something that needs to be said as we think about the porn industry. Sometimes we think, well, it's just an industry. If I'm hurting anyone, it's hurting me. Of course, in this podcast, we talked, it's not true. It's a grenade that goes off and hurts everyone around you, including you. However, it also perpetuates a wicked industry that continues to hurt people. Yeah. When we say that people are porn stars, it gives them the idea that they chose this career, they're good at it, they're using their gifts. And no doubt, there are people that chose this career as their way to make money, and this is their life. However, there are also thousands of men and women, mostly women, who are sold into sex trafficking and slavery. They're not porn stars, they're porn slaves. Yep. And that if they don't go into that scene, and if they don't do what they're supposed to do, that money isn't going to get sent to their family, wherever their family is. They're not going to get back to wherever they're supposed to be. That next big advance isn't going to be in their story. Right. They're not willingly there. Yep. They're there as slaves. And as you think about this evil, I think one thing that's important to understand is that, one thing that helped me turn the corner in my own addictions regarding this, and this is very significant for me, is that I started imagining that, this girl that Satan wants me to lust over, this is someone's daughter. Yeah. this is someone's precious child that they looked at and said, I love you. This is a girl who's made in the image of God, who God loves. And I will tell you, this is true. No one takes the sexy out of a moment like Jesus, okay? Once you start seeing this girl as like, this is the daughter of God. She is made in his image. He loves her. He died on the cross for her. And when you allow that holy thought into your heart, it does sever that connection to lust, because you're snapped into reality like, whoa, I'm watching something really sinful. And most people wouldn't sit around and watch someone get murdered, right? And be like, oh, I don't know, that was enjoyable. Yeah. Okay, you're watching sin, and it's gross and it's broken, and you know that. Yeah. And so in the same way, we have to be realistic and recognize that when we do, we're not only hurting ourselves and others, we're perpetuating an industry that will continue to hurt people for generations to come. And we have to give an account for that starting today. Yeah,
exactly. Phil, do you have any last thoughts or anything you didn't get to say you want to say?
No, I have enjoyed this conversation. I'm so thankful to be a guest on this show. I'm so thankful for this podcast where you can actually just, there we said it, like get it out into the light. That's some of those stats. Like we know it's happening, but we don't talk about it. And I would like to even address that a little bit too, as Sherry and I were talking even last night. Like even without the addiction story in my life, the church does not do a great job of talking about what healthy sexual boundaries are. Like all we really got was don't do it until you get married. Right. Thank you. That's super helpful. But I mean, how do we talk more about intimacy, and how do we talk more about this in a healthy way so that the next generation isn't as messed up as I am?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Thank you so much for being here today and for being open and vulnerable and honest and just bringing everything to light.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. If you want to stay informed about our podcast, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Search for There We Said It. If you like what you're hearing, can you do us a favor? Like, subscribe, leave comments in all the places that you can find us. And if you ever have any questions, please reach out to us at contact@therewesaiditpodcast.com. We'd love to chat more with you there, and we'd love to get some of your questions.